For those who have spent time on dating apps, you have probably seen some variation of
green flag if you're in therapy. Smiley face.
Or maybe just a declaration subtly stashed in a list.
Something you should know about me? Shrug emoji. Rock climbing, the beach, therapy, farmer's market.
Or something more aggressive like
in therapy. Expect you to be as well.
Well, online therapy apps are aware of this. They've almost certainly had some kind of hand in bringing therapy into the general wellness space, and for sure, they're interested in capitalizing on this, as evidenced by this ad.
Ooh, who's that?
Jacob.
Oh, Jacob from your date last night?
Yeah.
Jacob from law school?
Yes.
Jacob with the cute corgi?
Yes.
So, why are we ignoring Jacob's text?
He said he doesn't do therapy.
Oh.
Hard pass.
Red flag. Doesn't do therapy.
The undateable unless you're in therapy campaign seems to have begun and ended with that. But whether or not you've seen that ad, you've definitely seen BetterHelp ads and ad reads.
BetterHelp.com/corridor crew.
BetterHelp.com/Babish.
And in the second quarter of 2023, BetterHelp spent $29 million on advertising for podcasts, making themselves the top podcast sponsor, at least for that quarter. They are the most visible company in online therapy, but they definitely aren't the only one. There are dozens. Here is an advertorial from Forbes Health. Note the tiny little advertiser disclosure, listing their review of 10. These companies had huge bumps during the pandemic, and even though they've fallen a lot since, they aren't going anywhere. They are large, profit-seeking tech companies that, with the support of venture capital money, are slowly changing the mental health care landscape for both patients and therapists. So one thing to keep in mind that should go without saying is that they sell therapy and they have to maintain a profit. Their goal is to get as many people in therapy as possible. But does everyone need therapy?
Therapy can be a powerful tool, but it also has taken on a kind of mythic significance. Everyone should not be in therapy. The key thing that got to me about BetterHelp, they have pushed a trivializing attitude towards therapy itself. Therapy and psychiatric health become just another checklist item in sort of portraying yourself as a sort of successful and desirable member of the professional managerial class.
See, there is this giant hole in the healthcare system in the US. Arguably, the healthcare system in the US is more holes than actual fabric, but one of those holes is mental health care. It's expensive, it's hard to find a therapist, insurance, etc. We live in a country where we are so aware of how burdensome medical bills are that someone who was just shot will refuse an ambulance ride to avoid the bill. And if you don't have money for an emergency like that, you definitely don't have money for therapy. The very serious issue of a lack of affordable mental health care and access to mental health care mixed with the changing perception of therapy as an object of retail desire means that there is a vacuum in the market just waiting to be filled by enterprising techies. Thus, venture capital has seized upon this. In 2019 alone, venture capital companies invested $637 million in more than 60 different mental health-oriented companies. But the project of venture capital is to capture consumers, increase market share, expand. Reid Hoffman, who is a major person in the VC world and co-founder of LinkedIn, said, "If you are not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've launched too late." This is the ethos of venture capital and tech. But what if you are creating a product that's meant to deal with and treat a person's unknown psychological fragility? Maybe in that case, we don't want to be too embarrassed by our version 1. But unfortunately, it's up to the companies themselves to decide the level of embarrassment they can tolerate, because the National Institute of Mental Health itself acknowledged that there are currently no national standards for evaluating the effectiveness of the hundreds of mental health applications that are available. The VC and tech world have a fanciful notion that the issue in medicine is human inefficiency and that AI and innovation are the solves. But actually, the radical change that healthcare needs is to just stop being an industry in which profit is in constant conflict with a patient's bodily need. Now, if Silicon Valley could create an app that does something like curtail the power of the insurance lobby, in the future, as brought to us by VC and tech, comes the proliferation of independent contractors and the atomization of workers beyond what we once thought was possible. And with these apps, therapists now join the gig worker club. And therapists already have challenges in their careers. It's possible that as much as a fifth of clinicians meet the cutoff for secondary traumatic stress, essentially from caring for people with trauma. And from things ranging from budget cuts to student loans, the average student debt of a master's level social worker is $46,000, many clinicians live in a state of financial precarity that occasionally prevents them from being able to afford their own mental health care. So given that, it makes sense that there would be such a huge number of therapists looking to either make a full-time gig out of or just fill in the gaps of their employment, signing up to work for one of these platforms, which, depending on the platform, may be concerningly easy, as one therapist describes his experience of signing up for BetterHelp. It involved submitting a copy of my mental health license, providing information on the kind of patients I'd be willing to see, and creating a profile describing my background and approach to treatment that patients could see upon being matched with me. Once approved, I was invited to a 15-minute interview with a woman who did not work as a therapist. Its main purpose, she told me, was to provide information about the platform and the next steps in the hiring process. Early on in the interview, it became clear that I had already passed the screening without any discussion of my experience or clinical competence. The interviewer said I could start seeing patients once I completed a background check by a third-party service and completed a quiz I would receive shortly by email. The quiz included 6 easy multiple-choice questions about psychotherapy, followed by a prompt to write a response to a female patient's initial written request for therapy. The interviewer said no one she screened had ever failed it. Now take that in combination with the pay and incentive structure. At BetterHelp, the more hours you work, the higher your hourly rate is. Working under 10 hours a week pays just $30 per hour, while 35 hours and above pays $70. Whereas at Talkspace, clinicians will receive bonuses for certain hourly benchmarks they work. One therapist for BetterHelp said that patients weren't screened well and some were inappropriate for online therapy, struggling with severe psychopathology and required intensive in-person or hospital treatment. But he wasn't compensated for the time it took to arrange referrals for such patients. Therapists at Talkspace complain about unreasonable expectations from clients, partly due to unreasonable response time requirements and unreasonable hourly expectations from the platform because they are paid based on actual session hours. Therapists are essentially working 40 hours with 30 hours dedicated to client sessions and the remainder for administrative tasks. This includes responding to messages twice daily, often while still in session with clients. There appears to be serious incentives for therapists to overwork themselves, and it seems that the culmination of these things like low pay, long hours, and poor vetting have led to some pretty terrible experiences. These might range from therapists being 10 minutes late to a 10-minute long session, to responding to a patient's traumatic story by repeatedly promoting their book, to this.
One of these users is Amanda. She joined BetterHelp after a sexual assault triggered memories of an abusive past relationship.
We had a conversation regarding the fact that I was getting back on the dating apps. Although I wasn't ready at that time to actually take a step forward into communicating with anybody or actually going on dates. The homework that he gave me for that session was to meet up with 3 men before our next session.
Therapy apps didn't invent the crappy therapist, but as giant matchmaking services for therapy, they should take some sort of responsibility for the therapy dealt out by their, apparently vetted, therapists. BetterHelp, however, does not. Therapists are independent providers. The platform's role is limited to enabling the therapist's services. The therapists themselves are responsible for the performance of the therapist's services. Platforms may take as much or as little responsibility as they like. Now, no discussion about a tech company would really be complete without talking about data. Because just like all tech companies, whether they are selling you groceries or teaching you how to grieve, these companies want to monetize your information. BetterHelp started paying out almost $8 million in refunds after a settlement with the Federal Trade Commission over allegations that it shared sensitive health data with advertisers. But they are not alone. The Mozilla Foundation reviews consumer tech and products for the data protection they offer or don't offer. Talkspace, they use markers like gender identity, sexual orientation, and whether you're feeling depressed for things like tailored ads. The popular app Cerebral, in addition to having revealed that they shared the private mental health information of 3.1 million users, Mozilla found 799 points of contact with different ad platforms during 1 minute of app activity. And another app they reviewed called Replica, which is text-based, apparently, in terms of privacy, is the worst app they've ever reviewed. Texting is a common feature for these apps, whether it's primarily in text or just texting between sessions.
I can tell you right off the bat, for me, that would not work at all. The basics of what I need from the therapeutic process just wouldn't be satisfied under those conditions. But I also know people for whom text-based therapy has been exactly what they needed, because what I'm looking for in terms of the intensity of human connection and interaction with a therapist is what has kept them out of therapy traditionally. And the text-based therapy has been a non-confrontational way to sort of address some of their psychiatric issues. It allows them to have a very low-stakes way to interact with the therapist. The problem, again, is that is a particular sort of use case for a narrow set of patients that it will be useful for.
Now, maybe this just occurred to you. If you could have an entire therapy session that's based on text messages, then what is to stop these companies from replacing therapists with AI therapists? The answer to that is nothing, and it's already a thing. Wyza and Wobot, also popular, are both just AI chatbots that have each had 1 million users. And in fairness, clearly people have found these services helpful, but professionals have warned that AI therapists could be habituating users to a relationship in which reciprocity is optional and awkwardness non-existent. You can switch it off whenever you like, but the point of a mental health therapy is to enable you to move around the world and set up new relationships. I mean, look, it's a therapy session that you can terminate if you're being challenged. And my understanding is that there just hasn't been a lot of research on this topic. But look, one researcher I spoke with pointed out that while a lot of these apps have problems, the issue isn't with online therapy itself. In a more functional healthcare system that had a more functional mental health care component, text-based therapy and maybe even AI could be used to treat subclinical cases or used to assess if someone needs to move on to a more personal level of treatment, theoretically. And virtual therapy is a totally valid way of delivering treatment. The issue really is that the largest purveyor of online therapy are for-profit companies that are motivated by short-term profit goals and not long-term quality care. And as they consolidate the market and make mental health apps the first place one seeks therapy, which is to say, siphoning clients or would-be clients from traditional practices, more and more people who work in this space will have to survive as powerless gig workers, who in turn are less able to provide adequate care. And sure, no one at these companies is saying that AI should replace all therapists. But what are the odds that there are people at these companies who would love to replace their therapists with AI? Because if you have the twin goals of providing health care and maximizing profit, one of those is going to be much more easily compromised than the other. And that will do it for me. My name is Spencer Snyder. If you found this video interesting, make sure you are subscribed to Breaking Points. You can find me on Twitter or at my own channel. Liking and subscribing always helps. Thank you to Breaking Points. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.